Opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the producer and those appearing in the show and do not necessarily represent the views of DerryCam, the Town of Derry, or any of its staff or affiliates. Hi, I'm Anthony Henry. Welcome back. So, I like to listen to audience input. Sorry, I misspoke. A little while ago, we did an episode. It was an hour long, and it was about one topic. Not really a debate, but more of a discussion. It was with the Representative Kevin Verville and Representative Tim Cahill about the legalization of marijuana. You guys said you wanted to see more episodes like that, so I'm doing one, and we are doing it about Defend the Guard. It is a topic that's kind of come up a little bit in the past on this show, but we haven't really gone in-depth into it. And it's a really in-depth subject. I don't really know too much about it, so I'm going to let the two gentlemen we have on the show today explain it. So I'm here with Representative Tom Mannion and Representative Jim Creighton. So before we get into the discussion, I'll have you guys introduce yourself. We'll start with you.
Awesome. So my name is Tom Mannion. I'm a representative out of Pelham, New Hampshire. This is my second term. I moved here in 2020 to escape Massachusetts lockdowns, and I got involved as quickly as I possibly could. I have a history. I was in the United States Marine Corps in a previous life, more or less, right out of high school. 9/11 occurred when I was in my sophomore year. I wanted to enlist to go fight the enemies of the United States, which specifically was Al-Qaeda, and never got an opportunity. Ended up in Iraq twice, Marine Corps infantry, kicking doors in. Never really understood why. As soon as I wrapped up my deployments there, I finished my first enlistment, went to college and all that, and have been studying U.S. foreign policy a lot since.
Representative Creighton.
I just want to thank you for letting me having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on.
I served in the United States Army from 1978 until 2012. I retired as a brigade commander, commanding about 3,000 international troops in Afghanistan for my last year. I've also, in that capacity, I've worked with the National Guard extensively, both in combat, in training, and then in an advisory role. And I'm really excited to be on the show and talk to you a little about it. I represent Hillsborough District 30 out of Antrim, and I'm just glad to be here.
All right, so I think what I'll do for this, I will have both of them explain their side, and then I'll just let them talk. Like last time, I'm not going to talk too much during this episode. It'll kind of be an easy show for me. And I'll intervene where I want to ask a question, but I'm going to let them run the show. So,
awesome. So I'll start off, I'll explain the bill. So Defend the Guard says that we will not allow the governor to give consent for deployment or activation under Title 10 for a deployment of the New Hampshire National Guard to a combat zone until Congress formally declares war, which they have not done since 1942. We've been operating under these AUMFs since Vietnam, which were supposed to be a correction to what happened with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, but it has proved to instead be a blank check and a pretty much authorization for the president to completely decide when we start wars, where we go, what our targets are, what the objectives are, and Congress just writes checks. That's pretty much what AUMFs have become. 2001 AUMF is still in effect. 2002 AUMFs are still in effect. Every attempt to repeal them has failed. They go through either one chamber or the other, depending on the term, depending on the powers, and it never passes. We're not able to repeal these. We have tried fighting this at congressional level to try to repeal these. Has been failing for 20 years now. So the objective now is to try to stop the madness at the state level. It's been filed, and depending on the term, like right now we're about 25, 26 states have filed it. It's passed the Virginia State House unanimously as of like 2 weeks ago, 99-0. It's come out of the committee in Wyoming, 9-0 recommended. Did die truth be told, it did die on the Senate floor in South Dakota. But it came out of the committee with a recommendation 3-1. We expected it's going to pass in the Arizona Senate again because I think every single Republican senator in that state is a co-sponsor of the bill. And that's the breakdown that I think I can have here. There is a large fiscal note, and that is the threat that they always do as opposition.
So I agree completely with the authorized use of military force, and that the use of that to send soldiers into combat and Marines has been abused, I believe. Specifically, the war in Iraq, I'm not sure, well, I know what I think, but that was a mistake. Afghanistan, I don't think there's anyone in January of 2002 that would have said no. This country was, in a rough way, and wanted to get back. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that was something that we were going to do, whether there was a authorization for war or not. The problem with the bill, as I see it, is that the United States National Guard is a force that is available under Title 32, or correction, under Title 10 to support the active duty military force. It is trained and equipped to do that, and it does that worldwide every day. I've served with the Guard in Honduras, in Korea, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, where they've augmented U.S. forces. Some of this augmentation is for training purposes. For example, in Belize, the engineers that help build roads and facilities in Afghanistan help the Belizeans do it. And that training led directly to their ability to do that. By the same token, when a hurricane hits, the training that they get overseas relates directly to their ability to support their state under Title 32 under the governor's direction. And so the National Guard deploys worldwide for many different reasons. Some of it is to support our allies, South Korea, for example, NATO, our allies in the Middle East, and we deploy over there on a daily basis. We're currently getting ready to deploy to Kuwait. We have tankers back and forth to the Middle East. We've sent soldiers to Poland. We've sent soldiers to many, many places around the world. Each one of these cases could be a military operation. For example, state of New Hampshire has the new 46 Alpha tankers, brand new. Everyone wants them. We're the only National Guard that has them. And they fly over to the Middle East on a regular basis. Under this bill, if, for example, we were called on to do something in the Middle East, and a tanker came up, then that would be supporting a combat operation. And under this law, we wouldn't be able to do that. Well, that's fine for us. Here's the rub. The National Guard in the state of New Hampshire is our militia. They provide the governor the capability to respond to disaster relief, the capability to respond to internal emergencies, clear roads, whatever that the governor needs to do, that's her ready force to do that. The Guard budget today is $395 million. Of that, the state of New Hampshire pays $7 million. So it's well over 95% of the budget for the National Guard comes from the federal government, so that the New Hampshire National Guard can perform their duties under Title 10. But on a day-to-day basis, the governor owns the National Guard, and she can use them whichever way she wants. The problem with this law, as I see it, is that if I'm the federal government and I give you almost $400 million a year, and you say, I'm not going, that's the easy calculus. Okay, I'm taking my tankers, I'm taking my artillery, I'm taking my $495 million, and I'm going to give it to Maine. Or I'm going to give it to Massachusetts, or whoever they're going to give it to that's going to perform those tasks. And so although I completely agree with the premise of the authorized use of military force, I don't believe that this is the way to do it, because I do not want to jeopardize the state's ability to support the state in order to make a point with Washington. Okay. And I went a little bit over, but that's
fine.
For the time.
I mean, we're just going to go back and forth, right?
There's no time limit
Cool.
here. Just go.
Fantastic.
Keep
so
going.
One of the things you had mentioned was hurricane relief, for example. The reason this bill originally came about, the idea here, is because during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, both the largest Louisiana Guard unit and neighboring Alabama's Guard unit and all of the civil engineering equipment that they use was deployed to Kuwait and Iraq at that time that happened. They had to call in guards units from all over the country to include as far away as Idaho. The guy who wrote this bill, who came up with it, is Dan McKnight, is from Idaho. He was part of that effort. So when we're saying we want the Guard to be able to be trained and ready for hurricanes, what happens when they're not there? They're not there to help. So they're going for all this training, and then when the actual S hits the fan, they're not available. And this, again, Helene ripped through Appalachia. 800 men from the Tennessee National Guard were deployed to Kuwait the week before that. So these people are now at the whims of terrible FEMA, hoping FEMA's going to help because their guardsmen aren't there. So we have all these things where we say, well, the training's great. We want them to be available, trained for hurricanes. They're not available when the hurricanes actually hit because they're off fighting these wars that were never formally declared. The second was about the relocation of the tankers. You can, having the tankers available, where we are in the continental United States is a strategic location. So being at Pease, maybe you want to move them down to Massachusetts, but you can't just take the tankers, stuff them in South Dakota, and be just as combat effective as they would be over the North Atlantic for mid-air refueling. To counter that, we also had somebody testify in front of our committee saying that as a way they were saying, the National Guard Bureau may or may not defund these because I watched units fall apart and be defunded because they couldn't meet recruitment standards. The state he was talking about was Massachusetts. They couldn't meet recruitment standards. So you can't just, moving these tankers is not just something they can do willy-nilly. They have to find somewhere where they have the personnel ready to do it, and they have to find an airfield that's willing to support it, that's also able to be a refueling. The location of Pease allows it to receive fuel right off the ocean. So they keep saying oh, well, just take it and move it anywhere else. You can't just take the tanker and move it anywhere else. Pease is a very strategic location of where it is. That's why I feel like if New Hampshire were to pass this bill, we have the leverage over Congress over having a strategic location such as Pease.
So let me just.
Yep.
So then the counter to that is that, for example, on Cape Cod, there's an air base there. And I was in U.S. Strategic Command for 2 years. I was responsible for the global assets in the United States as the chief of staff. There's plenty of redundancy in bases, both in Maine. I talked to the Maine National Guard last week. They're chomping at the bit to get these things. And that avoids that strategic problem. The other thing about the National Guard is many National Guard members aren't necessarily members of the states. I mean, that's not a requirement. A lot of them, if there's a position that they can get promoted into, then they can move to a different state to get promoted into that position.
Can I bounce off of that?
Please.
So another thing that we were talking about is there's a lot of guys that are in our National Guard that are specifically trying to leverage we give a lot of benefits, especially going to college, over by the seacoast and any of those colleges over there, state schools and stuff. We give it a recruit, so they can't just pick up and move. This whole thing where they're saying, oh, well, the entire unit's just going to get dissolved or the entire unit's going to get moved. It's the moving of personnel and equipment is a cost to the Department of Defense if they want to do this.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it would be the Department of Defense moving them. I would say if that unit goes away, their job goes away. And so the support, the transportation company that I have in Hillsborough in my district would go away. And then that would become an empty facility. If you take it to its extreme, and the federal government said, okay, your $395 million is gone.
That's another thing. So they always say their entire budget. The entire budget, they're saying basically the threat on the fiscal note is that they're going to get completely defunded. There's Article 1, so it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16 says that the United States, the Congress, shall fund the militia. It's nothing in there that says that we can just ignore certain states. It is the role of the federal government and Congress to fund the militia.
But the level to which that funding is provided is contingent upon the value that militia provides.
Right.
And so if by this law we say that value is gone because we won't use our forces in a national emergency, or unless a case of war is declared.
It's only so. Just to
enough.
clarify, the bill doesn't stop them from being used for any other purpose. They're Title 10. They can still be activated under Title 10 for border security. The three main constitutional duties of the National Guard, which is to repel invasion, suppress insurrection, and to execute the laws of the Union, which would be disaster relief or, as much as I don't like it, like COVID response or. Anything along those lines, like civil unrest, whatever it may be, hurricanes and all that. None of that is stopped by this bill. It is specifically for activation to deploy to a foreign combat zone specifically. None of the other functionalities are stopped.
So border control.
Yes.
You know, that could be considered a combat zone depending on how it escalates and what happens.
It's sorry. Let me paraphrase or clarify. It says foreign combat zone. So if the border itself becomes like, let's say, the cartel mobilizes in such a way that they overwhelm our borders, defending our borders is completely within the constitutional prescribed duties of the National Guard or the militia. They call the militia. That's something we should clarify. The militia has become the National Guard.
Fair enough.
And that's from the Dick Act, I think, in like 1911. It's been formalized as such. So anything in the Constitution,
that's our militia.
Yeah, that is our militia. And another, so like the funding goes through Congress. The funding's like kind of the entire counter argument, right? They always say the funding thing. So we have two members of Congress, Congressman Massey, Congressman Gossar, who have said repeatedly that there would be no efforts from Congress to defund the National Guard. There are people on the counter side that say that, oh, well, then the National Guard Bureau will just act unilaterally and do it, which I think runs afoul of the Impoundment Act, because if Congress has prescribed X amount of dollars goes to X state, the executive branch, there's a lot of talk about impoundment right now with like everything that's going on with Doge. The Impoundment Act of '74 said that if Congress writes an appropriation, that appropriation must be spent. So Congress would have to take an action, and we already have, like, Shaheen is on the Appropriation Committee and the Armed Services Committee in the Senate. So I don't see her making the political suicide move of defunding her own National Guard.
But you can't write a law based on the personality of one person. And the compelling argument, in my mind, is that if you're not doing what I'm paying you to do, then there's going to be a whole lot of pressure. Well, you know, I mean, think about Doge. If Doge looked at it and said, hey, we're giving you $395 million and you're not doing what we want you to do, that's just not going to go well.
But they still are. They are still available for the constitutional prescribed duties that they have to repel invasion, suppress insurrection, execute the laws of the Union. The only thing we're saying is
authorization of military force is a legal way that we've done this. I mean,
we contend that it is not constitutional.
I understand that,
yeah.
But the last 80 years, that's been the use that we've used. And so to say it's not constitutional is an argument at the federal level. I understand that. And if they come back and say it's not constitutional and that everything you've done for the last 80 years is a violation of the Constitution and therefore illegal, so be it.
Yeah.
But today,
someone has to spark the challenge, and no one at the federal government is willing to do so.
Well, I think that's a place where we have to elect people to do that. I don't disagree with that.
So both of you were in the House last term, and this pretty much same bill came up last term.
Yes.
What did it look like last year? And it did fail in the Senate.
Yep.
Describe that.
Okay, so we passed it out of the House in a bipartisan fashion. I knew that I couldn't trust everyone in my party to go along with it, and we had that razor-thin majority. So I worked with the anti-war progressives, and I got them to buy off, and they support it. They still support it right now. I have 3 Democrat co-sponsors on this bill right now. I do also have 1 senator co-sponsor, which is maybe going to help me in the Senate, but I doubt it. Like I'm not going to lie to myself that this thing's going to just sail through the Senate this time because of the backlash that happened from it failing in the Senate last time. We didn't even get a roll call. Like, that's all we wanted. We just wanted them on the record saying, hey, we're fine with sending our guys downrange to die in these useless wars. I just wanted that on record. We couldn't get that from the Senate. I hope we can get it this time. We have a different shakeup. This time, we have a bigger majority on our side, and frankly, in my opinion, this is a red meat Republican issue. We actually have, in Texas, in 2024, they had during their Texas primary, GOP primary, they had a ballot proposition, I think it was Proposition 6, where they polled the entire GOP electorate in Texas and asked them, do you wish to support this bill? And it was that bill, and it was a question. It went out there. 1.8 million GOP Texas voters supported it. 84% of the GOP protectorate. It outperformed Trump on that same ballot. Like, this to me is just a slam dunk Republican issue, and especially with like the tide turning and the support behind guys like Donald Trump, who has gone on Joe Rogan and even J.D. Vance, and they have talked about the mistakes of the global war on terror and specifically the Iraq War. And Pete Hegseth has said the exact same thing. Pete Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense, and he spoke, when we passed this out of New Hampshire last year, he spoke specifically about our success, saying he likes this idea, he likes what this bill stands for.
There's another side to that story.
Yeah.
And yes, in February it came in. I remember I sat down because I look at the bill and I think it's a suicide bill for our Guard.
Okay.
That's what I believe. And I consider myself a very staunch Republican. Okay. When I looked at the bill in the morning, I thought, okay, this isn't going to pass. And then it passed. I'm like, oh, man, I missed that. So then it came back in March and went to the Senate, and it came back in March. And
I tried to amend it to another bill.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when you spoke against it.
And then I spoke against it, and it went down. You probably remember the numbers, but it was by well over 100 points, 100 votes that it went down. And so, yes, it did pass out of the House, but then when it came back, and I truly believe from the people that I've talked to that people didn't know what it was. And once they finally decided, when they finally understood what it was, they voted against it. And so it went down really hard later on in the year once it came back from the Senate.
I counter that with because it was a non-germane amendment to a bill that we pulled off consent, and everybody just wanted it to die and go away. They wanted the amendment to die and go away. They wanted the bill to pass on consent. They were mad that we even were voting. It was late in the day. I contend that people were just pissed off at the environment, less about what the bill was.
And I fair enough, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Because the only thing we talked about was to save the Guard. And that was what people were voting against. So I think, I think that you're right. It would be nice to have it nice and neat, declare war, off you go. And use the Guard as it's designed and come back victorious and have parades in New York City and Concord. That would be great. But that's not where we live right now. Where we live right now is we use different means to go to war. I completely agree, and I said it at the time, that the Iraq War was a mistake. I was in a position to talk to a lot of people when they asked me that question, and I didn't understand it. And I think a lot of our problems in Afghanistan were directly related to going to Iraq, because it sucked the resources, the attention, and the focus from Afghanistan to Iraq.
Yeah.
And that lull on NATO's part in Afghanistan allowed the Taliban to come back.
I believe that no matter how long we were there and how many people we had, the Taliban would have come back. They did the same thing when Russia went all in on it. They're not going anywhere. It sucks to admit that both of those wars were failures. It's not good to admit you lost, right? And I feel like there was no actual mission in either of those countries. The mission was basically a lie in Iraq to go find weapons of mass destruction. Then it became, okay, well, let's just get rid of Saddam. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have to stay here and give them democracy. The country is now basically a pseudo puppet for Iran because we gave them democracy, and they've pretty much infiltrated. And they just look the other way, and Iranians move through the country. And then Afghanistan, 20 years to take it from the Taliban and hand it back to the Taliban. I don't think any amount of personnel or money or time of sitting in that country would have had a different outcome there. It's a completely tribal country. We would have probably had to sit there for 100 years, multiple generations, to change the entire country, like the entire the tribal nature of everything. Change the country from the ground up. Like, we'd have to have multiple generations of children being born under American occupation to change their minds.
Yeah, I don't know. Iraq, I can agree with you on Iraq. Afghanistan, having spent almost 3 years there at the strategic level and then down at the Shura level in many hundreds of different villages, I would argue that had we left a modicum force there, 3,000 to 5,000 folks, that's not an occupation force, that we could have maintained stability. And much like Korea, I'm not for a minute saying that Afghanistan would ever be Korea. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we did provide stability in that country for 35 years before they really became a solid democracy.
But my question with the Afghanistan, so like you stay there for how long and how many casualties? Like how long are the American people supposed to tolerate?
Well,
like,
the
random
last 4
casualties?
years we didn't have any casualties
Until the last pullout.
Well, yeah, I mean yes, fair enough, but that was self-inflicted. That was
Biden's
a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah, I'm willing to point the blame all at Biden for that. But.
Fair enough. Whatever the blame is, at the end of the day, that was a self-inflicted wound. But prior to that, we had gone through years without casualties. And, they were progressing at their own pace, on an Afghan pace.
Yep.
And an Afghan pace is not a pace that I would want to follow. But I would say that there are millions of good people there, and that they deserved an opportunity.
Yep.
And that we had provided that opportunity. And it was never going to be a Western democracy. That wasn't happening. The tribal nature was pervasive and is pervasive.
Yeah.
But I would argue, having met hundreds of Afghans, that they just want to raise their kids. They want to be drug-free. They want to have the ability to go to school without being shot. And we were providing that ability through our support, and even with a modicum of 5,000 people.
There's reports that the Taliban was cracking down on opium production in that country right as we started rolling in, and then that entire crackdown on opium production disappeared. And there's definitely allegations of the CIA back-channeling opium out of that country.
I don't know anything about that. I do know that before we got there, in 2002, the Taliban had outlawed opium, and opium was not being produced. They were brutal in enforcement of their laws. And then when we got there, it was pervasive, and that was
some
something
would say
that
we maybe encouraged it.
I don't know. I know in my area, in the state, in the Uruzgan and Daikundi regions, which I was responsible for. There was opium, and we did nothing to
stop it.
We did nothing to promote it.
Okay.
It was not our policy to stop it.
Yep, fair.
So we did not do eradication. We did do finance interdiction. We did a lot of that.
Okay.
And we did a lot of engagement with warlords to prevent it. And then the bottom line is they were getting paid 20, 30, 40 times the amount to produce opium as they were to produce winter wheat.
Right.
And so it was a financial decision for them. And I remember distinctly having a discussion with a warlord, Nabi Khan. And I said, Nabi Khan, why are you doing this? You're killing your kids. The kids became addicted just because when they score the opium, it's a seven blades that create an S on the side of the opium bulb. And that allows the tar to bleed out. And the way they get that tar is they send their kids out into the field and they pull this tar off of the opium bulb. Well, what happens is it leaches into the kids, and the kids get addicted without knowing it. And so then they get real sick. And if something happens to them, you can't give them any kind of narcotic because their body is already immune to that. And so we had a kid come in with a broken arm, and we had to give him like more than an adult dose of painkiller to do the surgery that was required.
Yep.
So, but so I'm not saying there's not problems. There's huge problems. But what I am saying is that the education level rose dramatically.
Okay.
When I got to Uruzgan, the education for boys was about 7%. For girls was 0.3%. So the average in the province. This is rural, like middle of nowhere Afghanistan.
So I don't want to discredit anything that you guys we did good things for the people of Afghanistan while we were there. But the question is so the U.S. taxpayers paying for all this occupation and the education and these people in another country for how long? Do we just stay there forever? And that money could be spent in the United States. Like, I don't see like the juice worth the squeeze type scenario in Afghanistan for like, and I know like we're kind of getting off topic, but I kind of want to dial back to like another occupation. So the Iraq, we pulled out of Iraq during the Obama administration. We came back because of ISIS. And the only reason ISIS came into existence is because we destabilized it. We destabilized Iraq, not just because we left.
No, fair enough.
Yeah, we destabilized Iraq, and we were training Syrian rebels. So we were training the Syrian rebels against the Bashar al-Assad regime, and then they broke. A good chunk of them broke off to either go join Al-Qaeda or join ISIS, which was the more extreme version. And then a lot of those people found a bunch of weapons and vehicles and everything that we left the Iraqis. The Iraqi army, Iraqi police, it was all our stuff. If you've seen these videos of ISIS rolling around, they're in Humvees. It's our equipment we left. And they rolled through, they grabbed that. So we had to go back into Iraq after we had left and then bomb our own equipment and civilians, some more civilians. Like the death toll in Iraq is estimated at 500,000 civilians is the low. Like they think that it's as high as 1 million people we killed. And I know you're not against you're not for the Iraq War, but this kind of dovetails into so we're still in that region. We're still in the Iraq the Al-Assad Air Base and other places. They don't want us there. That could be Iranian influenced, but it could be we're sick of you blowing up our civilians in the name of whatever you're trying to do, anti-terrorism, whatever it may be. We have been now doing operations in Syria since I think 2014. When we fomented a rebellion, we caused the rebellion against Bashar al-Assad. Our intelligence agencies and special forces trained these individuals that broke off. They joined Al-Qaeda. They broke off. They joined ISIS. It's a fallacy that there's a moderate rebel group there. It is Al-Qaeda. HTS is the organization that now runs Syria. That is Al-Qaeda. The guy that's in charge of Syria that we basically handpicked and allowed to become there is this guy Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. He was the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and he actually was detained in Iraq at the same time that I was there for shooting at Americans. He was part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He spent small time in ISIS. And the reason I bring this up is because we never even passed an AUMF for anything we've done in Syria. So like we talk about AUMFs being improper, like they're not the right way. We didn't do anything. We didn't even follow the AUMF process for Syria. And not only that, they try to like claim that it's because of the 2001 AUMF, because terrorism. 2001 AUMF speaks specifically about those responsible for 9/11, that we can go into any country that harbors them to destroy them. And we've used that in Somalia and other countries where we've bombed Al-Qaeda in not Afghanistan. However, in this case, the 2001 AUMF is used as justification for supporting Al-Qaeda against the Bashar al-Assad regime. And this dovetails with the Defend the Guard because in Tower 22, which is an air base in northern Jordan, its mission was to support the operations in Syria. Last year, like a little over a year ago now, they came under drone attack from Iraqi militia. They always say it's Iranian-backed. They're going to first say that to the end of time because they want us. By they, I mean the military-industrial complex, the intelligence-industrial complex, wants us to go to war with Iran real badly. They said that they said it was Iranian-backed, but it was Iraqi militia. They're just pissed off that we're in Iraq. They attacked the air base in Tower 22. Tower 22 took 3 KIAs from the Georgia Army Reserve, but what they underreport is there are 41 National Guardsmen were wounded at that air base, supporting a war we never declared. And, a little cherry on top, that air base, the New Hampshire National Guard were at it 2 weeks. They pulled out. They came back from their deployment rotation 2 weeks before that attack occurred. It could have been our guys in critical condition sent back to Ramstein Air Force Base. And my question is, for what? Like that's what Defend the Guard is. The big question is like, why? You can't put your name on the line like the congressman. You can't even vote for an AUMF for the Syrian conflict because you know how unpopular it is. It didn't even get a vote on the Senate floor, if I'm not mistaken. They tried to do it in 2013 under Obama. That thing didn't even get a vote on the Senate because it was so damn unpopular. People were tired of war. And they can't be bothered to even follow their own made-up unconstitutional process of AUMFs. And we're getting men and women getting wounded in these combat zones. Defend the Guard could have prevented this. If they passed it in the 4 states, it was like, I think it was New York, Georgia, maybe Tennessee, I'd have to check, but it's like the 4 states took casualties in that base. Because why are they there? For what purpose? Assisting Al Qaeda in their coup?
You can make that argument, and I mean, Jordan is an ally, and
it's still considered a combat zone as far as combat pay is concerned.
But it's an ally.
Yes.
And I mean, Korea is still considered at war. It's under an armistice, and so we have 25,000 people in Korea, and we send people.
As far as Defend the Guard's concerned, I don't think that they qualify it as a combat zone. I'd have to double check.
It's not combat. You don't get combat pay.
Right, not
but
there.
Technically,
But
we're still at war with North Korea.
You do get it in Kuwait and Jordan because of their proximity to Iraq, Iran, and all of that. But so Defend the Guard wouldn't stop deployments to either Taiwan, Japan, anything over in the Far East. But it would definitely stop them sitting in Tower 22 to get attacked by Iraqi militia. Attacked by Iraqi militia because they're defending Al Qaeda in Syria. That's basically what they're supporting, an Al Qaeda coup in Syria. Like I cannot emphasize enough how absurd that is. The bipolar attitude of the United States.
And from a national perspective, I agree. From a New Hampshire perspective, we support our nation. Our support to the nation comes from our National Guard, which the nation pays for. And
to be fair, New Hampshire taxpayers pay the nation that then come back and pay.
Okay.
So we are paying for our.
I don't know that the New Hampshire taxpayers pay $395 million.
We are a donor state.
We are a donor state.
We are a donor state.
But we are one of them. I don't know what the percentage is.
There's not many.
but there are. We pay our fair share that then comes back.
We shouldn't. My only point in saying that is we shouldn't just have this blind it's federal government property. It is U.S. taxpayer property. All of these things, they belong to the people of the country, not the Pentagon. Is my point.
Well, at the end of the day, the state of New Hampshire is the recipient of it. And we are the ones that provide our National Guard soldiers to do that. And if they're going into what we believe is unjust, which is different than what Washington believes, then we need to take that up with Washington.
We've been trying that for 20 years.
Well, and then we need to exert the energy there rather than jeopardize what we have in the state, which is awesome soldiers that support our state every day in a myriad of different ways, as we've discussed, and to put that in jeopardy to make a point with Washington, I think
it's less about a point.
The best way to do it.
It is for them. It is to stop them from dying for nothing. That's the point of the bill. It's we're trying to make a point about AUMFs, but we're also trying to protect the low-level enlisted men that are sitting in these posts that are getting bombed. It's that is why I'm involved in this. That's why I'm anti-war. It's not because I don't want to hand money to BAE and Raytheon. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the boys that are downrange. That's why I'm getting involved in this.
Yeah. So I consider myself anti-war, and I
appreciate that. Thank you.
I've been in more than a couple of wars over the last 45 years, and I've seen many soldiers not come back, and I understand that completely from a visceral perspective. But I do believe that the United States has to stay engaged in the world, and I do believe, as you've stated, that we should be more transparent about the way we do that. But I'm not willing to put the state of New Hampshire at risk from a militia guard perspective, to do that. I think there's better ways to do it. And I'm all in to do those other ways.
Our big disagreement is that I don't believe that it is a better way because it hasn't worked for 20 years. I don't know how Like, there is no mechanism right now to stop what's going on besides the states asserting their 10th Amendment rights and saying the militia has a dual mission. It also belongs to us. It's not just yours to do with as you choose. The consent of the governor is specified in 12301. They must receive the consent of the governor to activate these units, and we are saying leverage that consent. We're not just saying, we're demanding that the governor leverage that consent, because we have the power over the governor to say you may not give consent, and that's the entire premise behind the bill.
Fair enough.
Yep.
I disagree with that. I agree with the premise, but I disagree with the method.
Fair enough.
So obviously you're both very passionate about this subject, and it's because you're both veterans. I wanted, that was purposeful. I wanted two veterans to talk about this bill. I don't think it should be anyone other than two veterans that talk about a bill like this on a forum like this.
Thank you.
So my question for both of you, where do you think your service influenced your opinions on this? Because both of you were in the military. I think you have both had you had a very different time in the military. Also, like, very different experiences. So how do you think those experiences impacted your stance on the bill?
It's a great question. I mean, my experience comes from serving 10 years overseas, serving on 5 different continents, serving in multiple different war zones with the National Guard, directly supporting and assisting in all those operations, and recognizing the importance that the Guard plays in American security, in the perception of Americans overseas, and in the ability of the United States to help play its part in maintaining a stable global environment. It's a vital thing that we do. It's a vital thing that the Guard does. And I've seen it firsthand since I came into the Army in 1978. And I do not want to jeopardize that in any way. And I think this bill does jeopardize that.
So for me, my service I enlisted specifically for the objective of going after specifically Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden #1, all of Al-Qaeda. When I wound up in Iraq, I was a naive teenager, didn't quite really understand what was going on there. I heard something about weapons of mass destruction. My first deployment, we actually were in the Al-Qaim, which is up by the Syrian border, and we found phosphorus plants, and we went in there. It was like, oh, they're going to make chemical weapons here. And I asked one of the nuclear biological chemical guys that was with us, and they were doing the testing, and I was like, have you guys found any of these weapons of mass destruction? The guy laughed at me as it was an absurd question. It's like, of course not. Like, we haven't found anything. So that's when I started paying attention to U.S. foreign policy. And because... So I don't usually tell, like, war stories, so to speak, but it's like when you see your buddies get, like, blown to crap in front of you, and then you come home and you're really questioning why we were there in the first place, it actually awakens, like, the darker question of, like, did they die for nothing? And, like, there's a lot of talk about, like, you know, U.S. security and all that, but it's like, how was us in Iraq at all for U.S. security? It wasn't. It truly wasn't. And I believe that the rash of suicides from the most recent wars in the 21st century are because guys get home and they question, did everything I just go through, was it for nothing? Did our point man die for nothing? It's like, did I lose my legs for nothing? And that, like, that's an existential crisis type of question, because it's like, whatever part of my brain, like the brain that other people have, where like they go get PTSD from what they've experienced, that part's either damaged or I'm able to isolate it, because like there are a lot of guys that were on my patrol when our point man, he died to a suicide VBIED. Every person in the column in front of me was wounded. That's a suicide-borne vehicle IED. The guy's driving the vehicle into the column, explodes, the car explodes. Our point man shot him in the head, took him out. It had a dead man switch, I think, wired to the hood release, and the entire vehicle just exploded, evaporated. Like, there was nothing left. It took out our point man, and every person in the squad in front of me was wounded. Call it like faith, call it angels, whatever. I was emerged unscathed. most of the guys in that squad that I know like have some form of PTSD. I don't know if like the part of my brain, like maybe I'm a sociopath, I don't know, but like I emerged and I haven't been mentally damaged by it, but it has definitely like given the fire under my ass to try to fight against this. Like the United States in general is not the world police. It should not be the world police because we are making terrible decisions like the war in Iraq. And there was a major general, I forgot his damn name, but there was a plan after 9/11 to invade. It was 7 countries in 5 years that they wanted to regime change. Most of them have occurred. The only one that hasn't was Iran. The list included, it was Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Iran, and then another. And like, we've regime changed all of those. And it's just, I do not trust U.S. foreign policy. I do not trust the State Department. I do not trust the Department of Defense. And I think Daniel Webster said it best when he says it is the job of the state governments to interpose between an overzealous federal government that would exploit our militia. So I take that to heart. And like, I'm doing what I can in the role that I am because I've seen how many times it has failed at the federal level trying to stop this madness. So I'm doing what I can from where I am.
I can't really comment on either, but I'm glad that I'm glad your stories are out there.
Well, thank you for having us on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so feel free to give any closing statements before we end.
I think we just did.
I think that was a really good send-off. If you support the bill, it'd be great if you reach out for your, you know what, even if you don't support it, reach out to your representatives. People should be more in touch with their state and local representatives. Tell them how you feel about it. If you are a supporter of this bill and a member of the VFW, American Legion, Marine Corps League, please talk to your leaders, like whoever it may be, your commandants, whatever, move it up the chain because I'm really sick of fighting the State Veterans Advisory Committee on this because they say they represent all of the veterans in the state. They don't represent me or like the massive amount of anti-war GWAT veterans when they just blanket say we oppose this unanimously. That is very disingenuous and I think it's unfair.
Yeah, I would counter that the veterans that I talk to are the other way around. And so, you know, the vast majority in my American Legion, my VFW, the neighboring VFW American Legion that I talk to, support the Guard as it is and do not want to risk, do not want to risk the Guard.
Do you guys have recruitment problems trying to get GWAT veterans?
Actually, our American Legion and our VFW have both grown in the last year and a half.
Okay.
So, great points by both. Contact your representatives. I think this is a good lesson to know where your representatives stand because both Representative Creighton and Representative Mannion are both from the same party, but they disagree on one thing.
Yep.
I'm willing to bet they're pretty much aligned on everything else.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and one quick piece of dairy news. Remember, our local election is March 11th, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at Pinkerton Academy, Hackler Gym. I'll talk about our town council candidates quick. We have 2 unopposed seats. District 4, which is Randy Chase running unopposed, and District 2, which is Charles Foote running unopposed. And then we have a very contested race for councilor at large. 4 candidates, Jacob Coughlin, Jim Dietzel, Michelle Mauger, and Tom Carden. Research all 4. They're all very different people. And I think that'll be the race to watch here in Terry. I thought it would be school board, but that's going to be the race to watch. Well, thank you both for coming on. It was
Thank
a,
you
it was a
so
great,
much.
It was a great discussion. I need to do more episodes like these.
This is fun.
It was
Yeah.
fun. It was good.
All right, I'm Anthony Henry. This has been America's Ass. Thank you for watching.